Hello, we're your hosts, Sourish
and Kuan,
This is WaffleByte,
where we bring you interesting bites about technology,
business,
and things that might change the world.
You can find all our sources in the description,
and you can skip to the chapters you're most interested in.
But for now, enjoy the show. Merry 2025, Kuankuan.
Merry 2025 to you too, Sourish. How did you enjoy New Year's in India?
It was fantastic. I went to the very tip of India, which was quite nifty.
Do you have any New Year's resolutions planned?
Nope, I actually think they're kind of dumb. If you should do something and you should change your behavior, do it today. Don't wait for the next year to do it. And if the year has to be a motivation to change something, then I think you need to find better sources of motivation. But that's just my 2 cents.
I just find it very funny when gym companies sell a load of memberships towards the start of the year, and initially these memberships are very well used, but as the year progresses, they become less well used. I just find that to be very funny.
And the first thought for the year is, would a 4-day work week become more feasible with increased job automation powered by AI and robotics?
Honey, a popular browser extension, was caught up recently when Megalag, who is a YouTuber specializing in investigating shady business practices of big companies, posted an investigation on his YouTube channel suggesting the extension had misled consumers and the people it paid to promote it, stealing from them in the process. Honey had previously advertised that they're a free browser extension and it always finds the best coupon codes for its users. It has sponsored thousands of videos in an influencer marketing push, totaling over 7 billion views. Megalag suggested that not only did the extension strip out the creator's affiliate link, it replaced it with its own, in the process denying millions that would otherwise be paid to creators. To give some context, affiliate links are a method for creators to get paid when they promote certain products and leads you to make purchases. For example, if you clicked on an Amazon link in a description of a YouTube video, it may contain an affiliate link of this YouTuber. And so when you buy this product, Amazon will give this YouTuber a bit of a kickback. And if you have multiple YouTubers who have links that you clicked on, it's always the last click that matters.
There are various ways to do affiliate marketing when it comes to an e-commerce website. And the 3 main ways is first link, which basically means that if you're interested in an Amazon product and you click someone's link, but then you haven't yet bought it because you're still deciding, so you click another person's link a week later and buy it then, well, the first person whose link you clicked will get all of the money in that case, because they're the one that directed you to the product in the first place. Now, most commonly, last click is used, where that last person, that second person, would have received all of the revenue. But there's also a third model, which is dynamic, where it's split between the 2 influencers whose links you clicked. Now, most people actually think that last link is fair enough, and in most cases, it usually does correctly attribute the influencer with the buyer, and so most people are happy with last link affiliate programs. However, as Honey clearly showed, there is a huge flaw in this, which is that without doing anything at all, they can just insert themselves right at the end. And now you may think that affiliate marketing isn't that huge of a business, right? You're only getting maybe, 1% of a kickback when someone buys something from a website. And for big media companies, well, the real revenue, you might think, would come through sponsorships and advertising and other things. However, Linus Media Group showed in their 2020 revenue chart that 9% of their revenue came from just Amazon affiliate links. And so in total, I think it was closer to 12 or 13% of their total revenue came from affiliate marketing. And that's a huge amount for a company that rakes in probably tens of millions of dollars every single year. And so Honey was taking that money from them and various other creators, hundreds and thousands of other creators, to make the money for themselves. And that's the dodgy part.
I think it's fair to say that affiliate revenue can be very important to, say, smaller creators who may not have a diversified revenue stream and maybe in certain niches where monetizing is difficult compared to, say, LMG. But also, what really struck me was that in Megalag's video, he actually signed up to be in the affiliate program of NordVPN, and he purchased using his own affiliate code. And did you know, Sourish, that NordVPN gives a 40% kickback as part of the commission to convert a sale? I think that was astronomical. But also, Honey also claims to share some of its affiliate revenue with the user. And in this example, Megalag, who bought a VPN using his own affiliate program but using Honey, received only 89 cents back. And he also got none of the affiliate revenue because Honey took all of it. Now, this leads me on to the fact that when Honey claims that it would always find the best coupon code, well, that was actually in fact false, because they would allow companies who partnered with them to choose which discount codes were available to consumers with Honey. So if I was selling, for example, sunglasses, I could choose, if there were 5 coupon codes, to have the 10% one visible to Honey users, but not the 20% one. So I could then make more money by pocketing with Honey, and the consumer would then be worse off, and they'd also be lied to, which is most important. And so Wendover Productions and Legal Eagle, 2 YouTube creators, in addition to some others and their respective legal teams, have sued a class action lawsuit against PayPal for misleading consumers and their dodgy business practices. And I just thought that was incredible. Not only the whole notion of a bunch of YouTubers suing PayPal 10 years ago, that would be unbelievable, but also I think it shows that there is some attempt at holding these companies accountable. Now, I've tried Honey before, but I didn't find it to be very useful. But over 20 million users on the Google Chrome extension store had installed it, and so presumably all of their shopping was directed through Honey, and Honey was able to profit off of the affiliate revenue for these users. Now, I think it begs the question of accountability when it comes to a digital marketing practice, like in sponsoring YouTube video, and that should these shady practices have to be done in real life, say somebody stealing somebody else's commission, would this be allowed and would this be stopped much more easily? Sourish, what do you think?
Zooming out, I'm actually just blown away by this situation. Because this one company, Honey, they essentially hacked the whole game. They figured out how to win, and they inserted themselves at every part of the process to figure out how to make as much money as possible and win leverage over as many parties as possible. Because, I mean, I'll just list off everything that comes to mind, but firstly, they did influencer marketing, which, of course, is still a relatively new thing, but something where the viewer feels this parasocial connection towards the influencer, and therefore is more likely to use a product. And also, Honey made it very easy for influencers to deal with them, as MKBHD said in his almost apology video. Now, secondly, Honey realized that as a browser extension, you can kind of do whatever you want. And I recently dabbled into browser extension coding, and you can indeed do pretty much anything you want. And that's extremely powerful in so many situations. And specifically, the Honey creators figured out it's very powerful in e-commerce. Now, thirdly, Honey realized that they can gain leverage over certain websites. For example, Amazon a few years ago had this whole thing against Honey, and actually on Amazon's website, if you had the Honey extension installed, Amazon would warn you that Honey is probably stealing your personal data and whatever, which firstly is ironic, but secondly is probably true. And Amazon hated Honey, and that's very valid because Honey would be inserting affiliate links into every single Amazon product you bought. So even if there was no affiliation to be had for a product, so that money would otherwise go to Amazon, is now being stolen from Amazon to Honey, let alone from the other creators on the other products you may purchase. However, suddenly this warning banner on Amazon's website disappeared, and this almost certainly happened because Amazon partnered with Honey, and that partnership only would have occurred because Honey had the leverage over Amazon. Honey was so big and so powerful that they could essentially create a deal with Amazon that works for Honey and ensures that Honey aren't banned. And they could do that with pretty much every single website that they work with, which could drive even more revenue for them. And finally, Honey made themselves free for the user. And as we've discussed many times before, internet users expect products to be free. And so if Honey can make their service appear free to the consumer, consumers are gonna love it. And so, just like that, the creators of Honey really figured out how to crack the system, and for that, you've got to respect them for making literally billions and billions of dollars by doing this.
It's no wonder that PayPal forked out $4 billion to acquire Honey, which is quite unbelievable, and you have to think they must have made a majority of it, if not all of it, back with the user base and the amount of traffic that it's getting. We've seen that online YouTube video sponsorships are a bit more lenient in terms of the due diligence. And in fact, if you were to put an ad on TV, you would have to deal with much more regulatory scrutiny and follow best practices to an extent which you don't have to do on YouTube. And I think Tom Scott actually pointed it out in one of his very good videos. Some influencers have seen this negatively affect their brand because, of course, you don't want to be associated with businesses doing shady things. And influencer marketing is remarkably effective. As we've seen, it's seen such incredible growth, and people have, as we said, this parasocial relationship with these creators. And so, because of how effective it is, influencer marketing can be very expensive. And in my view, only a few types of company can afford this. One being those people selling a product that's extremely low barrier to entry, but high margins, like VPNs. You always see these insane discounts when creators promote VPNs. They're like 80% off. And that's because even though they've given you such a big discount, because it's so high margin, they can still profit off of this lower price. I think there are a lot of shady companies as well, and supplements come to mind, because with supplements, they're not regulated as much. So you can claim quite miraculous things, and they may not actually materialize once you take this particular supplement. And finally, there's these large companies like Samsung, especially around, for example, things like CES and major product launches. They might partner with creators to do some marketing pushing. And I think this is the least dodgy type of deals that a creator can do in terms of sponsorships, because these companies are well established and they tend to be a bit more transparent as well with their business dealings. So I think not all creators have such high standards picking a sponsorship partner. And that is something I would like to see change, because I think it would be better if we had a bit more integrity in YouTube sponsorships. On the other hand, though, you can't really blame creators to just want to get paid, because it's quite difficult being an influencer. The competition is very fierce, especially recently. And so you can sort of understand that, your next paycheck may not come, so you might want to just get paid. So, Sourish, do you think that they should be entitled to get paid, even though it's a bit shady?
Most influencers, of course, rely on their audience for money. And if the audience doesn't like the sponsorships the influencer is taking, at some point, the influencer will have to stop. But I don't think that influencers, or most influencers, especially the big ones, are knowingly taking shady sponsorships. Because if you think about it, if you are the influencer, you've maybe been given a Ridge wallet, you've downloaded a Honey Chrome extension, and in your day-to-day life, it has improved your life, even if it's just by a tiny amount. And that's the key bit. It's improved your life by a tiny amount from your end user perspective. And yet, in your video where you promote this product, you're going to bang on for at least 30 seconds about how mind-blowingly great this product is, about how Honey is so free, it saves you tons of money, you should install it on your mum's, your dad's, your brother's, your sister's computer, because it's that good. And that disparity between how good it is as an end user, as an influencer, between how you're meant to sell the product, I think that's what causes issues. Because yes, you think the product is nice and you've used it and it works well, but then you have to sell the product after that. And that process of making the product seem so much better than it is what causes issues.
I think, though, that's also what makes influencer marketing effective, though, right? Especially certain creators can be extremely persuasive of things like that. I'm going to slightly push back on when you say that because of pressure from an audience, a creator is going to have to stop taking sponsorships. Because I think the reality is, most people don't care. And we've seen this with Mr. Beast when he was under some fairly significant controversies. People kept watching his videos and people still love him. And I just don't think that it's something that most people care about.
At some point, the human influencer will kind of have to care about their reputation. And that point may come very, very late for some people, or extremely early for others. But yes, there is always the driving factor for money. And so companies such as VPNs or, crucially, a company like BetterHelp, who offer the most amount of money for plenty of creators, will continue getting sponsor slots despite their shady business. Wrapping up though, I'm still blown away by this whole honey thing, because the business model they created and found is just unbelievable. It's immensely profitable, it has a huge scale, and it's just extremely intelligent. And regardless of the ethics of it, like, the people behind this are just, like, big brainers.
The United States, specifically the United States Treasury Office, was hacked by a group of Chinese hackers. According to the Washington Post, the Chinese state hackers hacked into the US Treasury offices that administer economic sanctions, and the department suggested that the hackers had stolen unclassified documents. They also described the situation as a major incident. The Chinese officials and representatives obviously rebuke this claim and essentially pretend that it didn't happen, but clearly it did. Now, sanctions are used by the US government against certain Chinese entities and Russian entities and others, but certainly a lot of Chinese entities, because the US deems them to be of a national security concern. So, for example, I believe the woman in charge of Huawei, a major Chinese tech company, is sanctioned by the US government. Now, aside from the fact that I'm not entirely sure sanctions are firstly always necessary and B, very effective, the fact that this office got hacked is certainly not a good look for the United States. Sourish, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yes, especially now that it comes right after 9 major US telecom companies were hacked by the same Chinese hacking group, Salt Typhoon.
It's certainly true that we've seen more, not only Chinese, but foreign adversary state activity in terms of cybersecurity in the West. And I think that firstly, this draws our attention to the importance of good cybersecurity. And I think a lot of companies are probably scratching their heads and spending probably a bit too much on cybersecurity consultants on how they can improve their own cybersecurity. But it just shows that these countries are willing to use these fairly, shall we say, slimy tactics to gain an upper hand in whether it's a geopolitical rivalry or, in previous cases, in fact, what the Chinese did was they stole intellectual property through these hacking operations from Western companies. And from this perspective of the United States and other Western countries, it is very annoying because, as we've seen, the United States doesn't seem to be good enough to prevent all of these attacks, and the United States can't really retaliate, certainly not publicly, because they like to think that they believe in a rules-based world order and don't do these slimy things. So it is just unfortunate that they're getting hacked left, right, and centre. But in terms of cybersecurity, so do you think the companies should really step up their processes on cybersecurity? And do you think that up until now, companies haven't invested enough in this area?
I guess there are 2 things you can split cybersecurity in a company into. The first is the basic stuff like 2FA, things that should simply be standard corporate practices in a given company, which aren't, and therefore cause issues, such as with the recent whole list of Snowflake breaches. However, I think yesterday it really struck me the gravity of this other camp of cybersecurity issues that you may face as a company. So if you're a company that does some coding or does something technical, then if you think about it, you may have, let's say, just a mere 500 software engineers or people working on the technical side. And like any of them could write a line of code that is vulnerable to a state hacker such as China. And that means that you essentially need all 500 of your software engineers to be not just vaguely aware of cybersecurity, but experts in cybersecurity in the given thing they're programming. And that just kind of blows me away how impossible that is to achieve, right? You need to make sure every single engineer you hire in your company knows cybersecurity to a very good extent. And if they don't, there is a very good chance that somewhere in your code base, one of your engineers who is a specialist at, for example, JavaScript, but not a specialist at JavaScript security, well, they may have coded something vulnerable. And when you frame the world in that way, you really do realize just how many services and things on this planet are indeed vulnerable. And it's no wonder that states with tons of resources always constantly find ways to hack major services.
I think the key thing you mentioned there is that simply the sheer amount of services we use, and therefore the companies we give our personal data to, and additionally, the sheer amount of lines of code a company has, whether it's for a product or a service, means that if you try hard enough, you will find some way in. Like it's not an if, it's a when, right? If you just try hard enough, you'll be able to breach this company unless they have, as you said, completely watertight cybersecurity practices, which simply are not practical, except maybe for the most secretive and the most important of things, which isn't everything that would be of interest to a Chinese state hacker. So I would suggest that companies should have better structures in identifying what in actual fact is extremely important information that simply cannot be leaked at any point. And maybe they could be given even greater cybersecurity at a much greater cost, of course, but at a cost where, given the smaller scale, becomes much more sensible and much more pragmatic. Because I'm sure executives at Microsoft and other tech companies will have things they simply cannot have leaked, and these things should probably be protected, and everything should probably be labeled more clearly in terms of the level of cybersecurity that it needs.
And on the technical side, this is where I really think it's true that your technical engineers, it's kind of just sad that most people and most engineers these days only kind of, like, they don't go down very deep into the technology stack. And so they may learn how to use a language or something like that, and they may stop there. Whereas if you learn how the language works and how it could be exploited, well, that's when you as an engineer can ensure that you write safe and secure code. But that's just something that most people don't bother doing. And the reason I mention that is because I think, at least in the next 5 years or so, it's only going to get worse because with the advent of generative AI, you can go another layer up the technology stack and therefore completely avoid even touching a programming language, let alone the security behind it. And so if people create applications and startups with AI-based tools, then the chances of security being built in are very low. And only once we then reach really powerful AI in 10 years that can search for security vulnerabilities, only then will we get safe applications.
The counter argument to that, though, is that as AI gets better at identifying security risks, as do the AI that adversaries or people with malicious intent use to try and break into the system. So it's really not a total solution, and it's sort of a problem that has to be systematically managed for indefinitely, really.
With the state of AI right now, it's mostly models that are locked behind closed doors at companies and not available to the public. And what that means is that you can, to an extent, control how much these models are used by bad actors. If you, for example, roll out cybersecurity services with your latest AI model, whereas the latest open source model is worse and therefore doesn't find the same vulnerabilities as patched by your better private model. Now, the counter-argument to that is that, firstly, no one is actually rolling out these AI services to spot vulnerabilities. And secondly, what if open source AI wins? And we're seeing that with Meta. And Meta's strategy, as it has been since their inception, is to essentially, if they can't compete in something, they're going to publish all of their work as open source, with the goal that more developers are going to use it. They're going to create an ecosystem around their open source products, which are of course free, and therefore they're going to push out competitors aside, such that their open source product is the dominating factor. And that means that whilst Meta themselves don't get any extra money from it, they push out their competitors from beating them. And we've seen that with Llama and the whole suite of Llama models. They're becoming infinitely and increasingly more popular versus the OpenAI and the Google models and the Anthropic models, just because they're open source. And so that might mean in 2 or 3 years, maybe the Llama models are the most used models on the planet, and that means that bad actors will have access to the same models that the defenders also have access to.
Last December, OpenAI released a preview of Sora to certain creators, including MKBHD, and subsequently rolled it out to the public, although initially demand was so great that people like you, Sourish, couldn't get your hands on it right after it was released. I can certainly see that for somebody maybe not paying a lot of attention or doom scrolling and seeing one of these clips, it could be that it takes a while for them to realise that it's AI, and if you don't spend the time thinking about it, as when people doom scroll, they don't, then you can often take in something that an AI has just said and believe that if it was a deepfake, for example, that somebody else said it. Google then seemed to release their own version of a video generating generative AI model, and it seemed to be better than Sora. Would you agree with that, sir?
Absolutely. The physics on the Google model is significantly better than whatever Sora has to offer.
Now, I think a while ago, I attempted to make the argument that Google was relinquishing their lead to OpenAI. And yes, and it seems that I am at least partially wrong. Certainly, I'm most definitely wrong in the video generating space, because Google's model, as you said, was significantly better. It wasn't even remotely close because the physics was just completely an order of magnitude better. And I think, firstly, I certainly didn't see that coming, and I'm not sure a lot of people did, because I think a lot of people shared a similar view to me, that Google were less good at the cutting edge, and certainly they weren't leading like they were back in the DeepMind days. And also they've been very quiet about it, and you do see a pivot from Google to realize that maybe they shouldn't have been so quiet about what they've accomplished in terms of their models, and maybe that they should show it to the world more, because I feel like OpenAI has been dominating news cycles far more than Google.
I think developers have kind of known Google's capabilities as being very strong from pretty much the beginning, because even though obviously developers don't have the absolute cutting edge models that are only internally available at Google, we still have access to extremely powerful models. And a lot of the time I would favor using the Google Gemini API over an OpenAI API. Whereas people who aren't developers have no clue, and why should they, right? They only want a web interface. And Google's web interface came extremely late. And whilst I actually think it's better than OpenAI's web interface, they also implement features a tad slowly. And they, of course, release features such as VO2 a tad slowly. However, I think in today's world, it is also a bit naive to assume that any company that has at least a few $1 billion and is tech-focused has not got extremely powerful AI models in the background that we are not aware of. I think the race is very fast-paced, and the sheer amount of money funneled through AI engineers is so huge that you just cannot know which company is leading and which isn't. You can only know which company appears to lead, which has historically been OpenAI.
Just to build on that, Sourish, there's 2 points. One is that a while ago, I was looking at this table or ranking of different AI models, and people were expressing their surprise that a Chinese company was ranked 6th or 7th or something like that, given the fact that not only have Chinese companies historically been behind in terms of AI models, but also the US government, in an effort to, I suppose, hinder the Chinese development of these things, have imposed very strict export controls on things like NVIDIA accelerator chips, which are crucial to training these models. And as you said, it's a very dynamic race, so you never truly know the stages of the models of each company and what each company is capable of. And indeed, they may also not want people to know, because it makes them become a target like OpenAI has. But I think there's a thing that people don't talk about as much, is that models, or the way that people evaluate these models, from my understanding, is that they can be subjective, and certain models can be better at some things than others. And I think it's dangerous to rank models based on a quote-unquote general ranking, because we may not use, or indeed the best use of generative AI may not be a general thing. And if you want to do something a bit more specific, you may well be better off choosing a quote-unquote less good model based on these rankings, because it's more specialized. And I think indeed specialization we've seen has become more of a focus as people have struggled to improve their general models as much. And this brings me on to the next one, which is that AI models, certainly OpenAI, has struggled to release GPT-5 that is significantly better than their current offerings, and they've actually missed their internal targets in terms of their next generation model. And I think that's also interesting.
I disagree there. I think whilst on paper that may be true, the improvements that we have been seeing to GPT-4 Because, I mean, again, even on the ChatGPT interface, sometimes the name of the model is the same, whereas in the background, there are updates. And so if you to look at the API, you are actually accessing a different model to what was previously used, even though on the ChatGPT interface, it looks exactly the same. And the improvements just blew me away, right? Every few weeks or every month or so, there's just a huge new improvement that just suddenly appeared out of nowhere. And I'm just consistently blown away by OpenAI. And they've just sucked hundreds and hundreds of pounds out of me and continue to do so just because they continue updating their models in the background. And this is kind of also what Google do without telling anyone. They just push some crazy new update, which no one knows about. But I actually think at this point, it's a matter of publicity as opposed to actual AI development being any slower than it used to be. In fact, I recently learned that OpenAI had access to GPT-4 about 7 or 8 months before they released it. And I knew it would be a long time before they released it, but I didn't know it was a whole 7 or 8 months of them having access to the same model that they then released 8 months later. To me, that is absolutely crazy.
I think that brings me back to the point where you don't know what these companies are working on, right? But I think, as with all sorts of innovation, the rate of innovation can't possibly continue forever. And so the question is, when does this start to plateau? Because I think it's quite significant in terms of the hype and the excitement that AI has. Should this plateau earlier than expected, that would have significant consequences. But equally, if, as you said, the rate of development continues, that also has other consequences. And I think we need to be mindful at that.
For the near future, I think it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy because people think the rates of improvement is going to continue, and so they're throwing so much money at this thing of AI development and AI scientists, such that those people will indeed increase the rate of development. But of course, at some point, this cycle will stop growing and AI development will slow. However, I think that is in quite a while from now.
A while ago, I was looking at the Bloomberg's Billionaire Index, as one does, and I saw Michael Dell among the top 15, I think it was, right behind the Elon Musk, who got hundreds of billions of dollars richer in a very short period of time, and Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg. And I was surprised because, to me, Dell is just the company who makes my laptop. They're not particularly innovative, and they don't do that great of a job at making laptops. So I was very surprised to find out what Michael Dell was worth. So Sourish, what do you think Michael Dell is worth?
I actually happened to have just Googled this, so I already know the number.
Oh, did it exceed your expectations then?
A little bit, yeah. I was expecting around $80 billion, but it's actually 120.
And how much do you think Dell Technologies is worth?
Now that is a good question. I actually reckon, I don't know, maybe 200 billion?
Michael Dell founded what is now known as Dell Technologies in 1984 whilst he was a student at the University of Texas in Austin. And he started building and selling computers under the name PC Limited using $1,000 he was given by his family. And he focused on assembling computers using standard parts and selling them directly to consumers using magazines as advertising. And this offered consumers more choice than some of his competitors. Essentially, he just did a direct-to-consumer model and cut out the middleman, and this business model was wildly successful. Michael Dell soon dropped out of college to focus on the business, and in 1985, PC Limited released a computer that was just under $800, which was much cheaper than the $2,500 Apple Mac. And in fact, in the first year of operation, they grossed over $73 million, and within 4 years, Dell Computer Corporation was a publicly listed company and worth over $80 million.
Wait, why did it take... So why after 4 years did they only increase their worth to an amount slightly greater than the amount of money they grossed?
That's a very good question, and I'm not sure we know the answer. But I think at the time, bearing in mind that it was the very start of the PC revolution, and perhaps the level of growth that we would see just wasn't accounted for, and as a result, they were valued relatively cheaply. I would also think that their margins would be fairly low, given the fact that they were competing essentially on price by using their direct-to-consumer model. But anyways, Dell was mainly successful because they outcompeted rivals such as IBM on cost and customization, since they went direct to consumer, cutting out the middlemen of distributors and retailers. And in 1992, Dell was incorporated into the Fortune 500, making Michael Dell the youngest CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Subsequently, in 2001, Dell became the top computer maker in the whole world, owing to lower operating costs than competitors amid the dot-com bubble bursting. Now, Dell would keep an extremely lean inventory, building computers as orders were coming in, which is part of the reason why their costs were lower. However, by the middle of the decade, sales had started to slow and their stock had started to tumble. This was because the PC market was simply maturing, and Dell, which was still mostly in the PC business, was exposed to this slowdown. And as the market matured, margins in the PC sales business decreased and competition heated up. So by 2010, Dell was really struggling. It was reliant on PC sales as ever and gathered a poor reputation for customer service, resulting in its stock price suffering compared to its highs in the early 2000s. Now, Michael Dell, who was still the CEO of Dell at the time, decided that radical action would be necessary, and so he took a lot of personal debt in order to take over the company, to have ultimate control. He then performed a leveraged buyout, also known as an LBO, which itself was difficult because another investor named Carl Icahn and other private equity firms were interested in buying Dell as well. Leveraged buyout is where a company is purchased using lots of debt or borrowed money, and specifically this borrowed money is attributed to the company and not a single person. So in this case it would be attributed to Dell. But anyways, some private equity professionals wanted to buy Dell because they believed that Dell was in fact undervalued. And so it's the sum of the parts that made up Dell is worth more than what the company was trading for. So they wanted to buy the company Dell and sell off each of its divisions to other buyers and make a profit in the process. In the end though, Michael Dell, with the help of Silver Lake Partners, were able to take Dell private in 2013. Just a couple of years later, EMC, which at the time owned VMware, a virtualization software, was under activist investor pressure to spin off the VMware division because investors wanted to only be able to invest in the profitable VMware division and the high growth VMware division, and not the rest of the business that EMC had, which includes things that were boring to investors like storage. Now, Dell announced that it intended to acquire EMC Corporation at the end of 2015, which was very significant because EMC was in fact worth a lot more than Dell, and the transaction was worth approximately $67 billion. In order to do this, Dell, the company, actually took out $50 billion in debt, which was tremendously risky because if Dell somehow suffered some losses, then it would mean that the whole company would be insolvent. Now, they sold off some groups acquired in the acquisition to pay off debts, but in 2018, Dell once again went public after their acquisition of EMC. And more recently, Sourish, I don't know if you're familiar, but they actually sold off VMware to Broadcom, which was incredibly lucrative because they got over 60 billion in cash and stock. Now, because some stock was offered, which was Broadcom stock, and Broadcom stock has been doing extraordinarily well recently, the whole deal ended up being worth over $90 billion. Because Michael Dell was the largest shareholder of Dell, he benefited hugely personally in terms of his wealth, and he ended up pocketing around $10 billion in Broadcom shares, which has since greatly appreciated. And so he's now worth over $100 billion, as you discovered earlier, Sourish. Now, Incidentally, Dell Technologies is actually only worth $80 billion at the time of writing. Now, I thought that was really fascinating because not only is Dell really sort of a household name in computers, it's still very present in the enterprise space. In fact, Dell, and I'd argue alongside with HP or Hewlett Packard Enterprise, as that division is now known, they make up really most of the office PC market. And Dell is what you sort of imagine a very boring computer would look like. Unfortunately, they also make my computer, which is a bit unfortunate. But I think this was really fascinating because it was a masterclass in financial engineering by Michael Dell, because he didn't do anything particularly innovative and extraordinary. In fact, I'd argue Dell have been particularly uninnovative recently. But he did turn a PC maker that was clearly struggling into a very, very profitable business that Dell Technology is now. And also, he made himself massively rich. I mean, he's now worth, over $100 billion. And I thought that was remarkable. I think this is a symbol of capitalist America, where you don't necessarily do anything particularly impressive, but through some clever financial engineering and some risk-taking, Michael Dell made himself one of the richest people in the world.
It is kind of crazy how this guy, at the head of what we all perceive to be a kind of dead company, Dell, how Michael Dell is the 11th richest person in the world. But I also think it's important to consider that I believe he owns about half of Dell. And so, when you look at other rich people, for example, Jeff Bezos, he only owns 10% of Amazon. But Amazon is just so big that makes him worth $200 billion. Whereas Michael Dell, even if he started up a much smaller company, the fact that he owns so much of it means that he has a pretty significant amount of wealth. Now, I think specifically the impressive part is the fact that he's managed to maintain such a large part of the business for himself. Because usually you need to find loads of outside investors and various other people or sources of money to either grow your business or to develop new innovation or to even just get it off the ground. Whereas Dell clearly didn't need to do that, which allowed the person Michael Dell to keep much of the money for himself.
Indeed, and I think, Sourish, you personally quite really like the idea of keeping a lot of control of the company to yourself. But slightly related to this, you mentioned Jeff Bezos, and I heard somewhere in an interview actually that he could in fact have taken a lot more Amazon stock as compensation, as part of his compensation package as CEO back when he was the CEO of Amazon. But he didn't want to. He didn't take any more stock, and I thought that was very interesting. Now, moving on, I think Dell recently made headlines because they, alongside with a lot of other companies, benefited from the trend in artificial intelligence. And because they make a lot of servers that they use in data centers, they saw their stock price go up massively as their sales grew. And I thought that was quite interesting, because in my mind, that was slightly unwarranted. Because compared to Nvidia, they're not doing that much. They're not adding very much value in terms of enabling companies to train models and things like that. Really, they're just acting as a system integrator.
Kind of, but kind of not. I think when you start a company or a business, you're part of the thing you're doing is taking risk into the industry. And so even though you may not achieve insane growth like Nvidia has achieved, because you're not building the products that actually drive the industry, you've taken the risk to be part of the tech industry in Dell's case. And therefore, if the tech industry increases in value, then I think it's perfectly valid for Dell to increase a lot as well without doing anything different to how they were doing it previously, because they took the gamble in the tech industry and is currently paying off.
Finally, Michael Dell makes what I think is an interesting point, in that he argues that investors should buy Dell because it's a very diversified tech business compared to other companies. Because it's in a lot of areas, such as storage, such as data center, but also in sort of the boring office PC space. And they also make consumer laptops, like the one that I use. But I don't really see merit in this argument that you want a diversified company in your portfolio, because tech, it's all about growth in my mind. And if you can't deliver growth, then why would you bother with tech? There are other sectors which you could invest in that are often more stable. And I think it's just not fitting in terms of Dell as a technology company having this mindset. And I think you want to be a bit more risk-taking and bold.
From a more numbers perspective, I also think this argument is garbage, because like you never, at least as a big company, you never ever strive, or a big investment firm, you never strive to make small returns, right? Even if you're a bank, you want to make well in excess of 10% every year from your investment, and chances are that's not going to happen from Dell. So even though Dell is perhaps, as Michael Dell argues, extremely low risk, the amount of reward you can get is also quite low, such that companies with tons of money to invest into other companies aren't going to care as much about Dell compared to, as you say, more growth-based stocks. So I think, I don't really know why anyone would invest in Dell, unless you just have a ton of money today and you intend to be alive for the next 50 years, such that your money will guarantee, well, not even guarantee, but like there's a solid chance that it will grow by a solid amount without you actually applying any time or brain power to it. But even then, if you are sufficiently rich to be able to do that, then you are sufficiently rich to probably have a family office, or at least have some sort of private, independent people working for you to make investments for you. And those people certainly aren't going to put your money into Dell.
I think that Dell just doesn't have a particularly compelling, unique selling point. I just think that they're fairly mediocre. I also think that they're maybe not as diversified as what Michael Dell would want investors to think, because they still make a lot of money through their bread and butter, which is selling boring and ordinary computers to companies. And that's fine business, they've been relying on it, but I don't think they've diversified that much away from it compared to perhaps IBM, because IBM are now in consulting and research and development, and I think they issue loads and loads of patents, which Dell simply just doesn't do.
When it comes to enterprise-grade hardware and software, a lot of it is really just about the trust and that you've built up over time. So even if Dell never really remains at the forefront of the industry in terms of technical developments, as long as they maintain that level of trust with other businesses, then they're just going to keep getting tons of customers. And especially in growing markets such as in India, when I was there in the past couple of weeks, I saw pretty much every business had a Dell computer, like not even an HP computer, but a Dell computer. And so there's clearly something going on there, where a lot of people in India just trust Dell, and therefore will not waste time trying to figure out which potentially new risky provider they should go with, and they just go ahead and buy Dell instead. And I think that will mean that Dell will indeed have a huge amount of money to be made over the next few decades. And so even if they aren't diversified, I do think they are an extremely safe investment. And part of that reason is just because they aren't diversified, because they are so boring and they just don't do anything other than maintain what they currently have and latch on to growing markets, like in India.
Picking up on your point about brand perception, I think that's very true. There's a very true sentiment, not only in India, but really across the world, in that people know Dell. They've probably used a Dell computer 20, 30 years ago, and they have great trust in Dell compared to some of the other companies which frankly make better laptops and desktops today than Dell. And I think it's a shame that given the current consumer laptop market, Dell isn't able to step up their game, because they could be a lot better.
You know, I kind of disagree there. Because I think Dell and HP actually make fantastic systems. So from a desktop side, well, I would argue that no pre-built is actually good. But the average consumer doesn't know that, and so the average consumer is very much going to look at the different options, and within that frame of reference, Dell and HP actually do quite well. Now, in terms of laptops, yes, I do agree that Dell's latest flagship line, the XPS series, is doing some sketchy things and not doing so well. However, HP's is doing fantastically, and importantly, the premium segment isn't necessarily where you're going to ship the most units for both Dell and HP. And Dell, for example, I believe they own Alienware, and Alienware is a rather popular gaming laptop brand. And other mid-ranger laptop brands, such as with HP's Envy and Dell's other Inspiron and whatever products they sell, those are still very popular, and those will sell a huge amount of volume for the foreseeable future.
I guess wrapping up, it's just a shame that Dell, as a company, they could have innovated a lot more. They were so early in the personal computer market, and it's sort of a shame that they haven't done so. Especially recently, they could still do a lot in terms of innovation, but we'll have to just see where they end up, because I think, as you said, they're not doing too badly in consumer and business markets, and certainly they take a lot of big corporate clients. In fact, they sponsor a McLaren Formula One team, which is one of my favorite teams.
I mean, arguably, Dell aren't a technology company, and so to expect them to actually have real innovation is a bit wrong, because arguably they're more of like a provider or a service company, right? They don't necessarily offer technology. And even from the early days, when you said earlier, Michael Dell, at the age of 19, he assembled computers to sell them. He didn't actually make anything, right? He didn't do anything with the tech. He just provided a service to other people using tech. And I think Dell has kind of stood true to that today. And the fact that they're leveraging the technology and providing a service on top of that is what makes them successful and what will continue to do so. And I think for whatever reason, the managers and the people at Dell don't want to change that business model. I don't know why. Maybe Michael Dell kind of just has other things to focus on in life and he doesn't really care. But yeah, it's kind of like we've seen with Supermicro, and their stock is ballooned this year, or at least at points in this year it ballooned, because the technology powering their service, which is just assembling servers and giving them to businesses, that service has only increased because the technology has gone so good that people want that. Whereas Supermicro haven't actually done anything different or majorly different this year compared to previous years in terms of the thing they're offering and the technology powering it.
I guess, as you said earlier, there's no shame in riding the wave when it comes, right? If you're in the technology business and it's doing well, you may as well monetize your company, because in a couple of years' time, you could be doing very poorly. So you really should take the benefits and take the profits whilst it lasts.
I recently watched a YouTube video. It was by this Indian tech creator who wasn't that big, but he had multiple side hustles, and he actually kind of got rich through those as opposed to his YouTube channel. And he banged on for like 40 minutes about this one concept that he believed is the most important in business, which is this idea of a slipstream, which is that I guess coming back to the Formula One car idea, if you're a Formula One car, or if the tech industry is a Formula One car, you don't necessarily want to be the car or the driver or the company behind the car. You want to be in the slipstream of the car, where you kind of just benefit from the car right in front of you going super fast, and you kind of just ride that wave. And this guy who's made his money, he made his money off YouTube by just riding the wave of YouTube as it grew, because as more people get online and more people watch YouTube, it's a fact that his channel is going to grow. The same way that it's a fact that Dell is going to grow if they keep providing the same service, because more people want a computer. Obviously, at some point you will hit a ceiling. But his argument was that, well, that's when you can go find a new business to join, a new industry to join, where the slipstream there is more powerful than the one that has just ended in your current business. The thought from the beginning of the episode was, would a 4-day workweek become more feasible with increased job automation powered by AI and robotics? I think this really sucks because, in theory, yes, job automation can reduce the amount that the average human has to work. And yet, capitalism and the whole construct of businesses means that simply is very unlikely to occur, at least in our opinion. But is there a point in time where the tech just gets so good that even under the capitalist society that we live in, this will be a reality? Will AGI, for example, simply just replace humans? Will that just mean that the amount of value that a human can add to a business is limited, such that you hire less, or maybe you only have a few important people who work less?
I think separating the near future, where, as I previously said, I don't think this will happen, to being a bit more speculative about what may be the case once we have significant advancements. I do think that if we are just unable to be as productive as AI, then what is the point in us working anymore, right? If we just live in an age of abundance, then wouldn't we just not have to work very much, if at all? But I think that has a lot of other consequences on society, in the sense that if food is very abundant, can we just have food for free? Can everybody just have the finest meat and fish and seafood and exotic mushrooms, I'm not sure that is how society is going to work. So, in order for there to be a differentiation of people's purchasing power, wouldn't you have to do some work? I don't know. It's a bit far-fetched for me, but I guess it would be nice if, thanks to AGI, we could guarantee a basic standard of living to everybody in the world.
What really interests me is if we look at the whole human development cycle from like whenever the Homo sapien was a thing, or even the people before Homo sapiens to today and the next few thousand years. Well, 10,000 years ago, humans were hunter-foragers. We went around and foraged for fruit and berries and whatever, and we hunted animals for their meat. And we did that in smaller groups of people, maybe between 5 and 30, usually around 15. But these hunter-foragers from 10,000 years ago, they worked about 28 hours a week. And by work, I mean the amount of time that they spend trying to get food. Because, at the end of the day, even in today's society, why do you work? You work so that you can get food, you can get a house, and you can buy things. Like back then, all you really needed was food. And once you had food, you could then do whatever you want with the rest of your time. And so hunter-foragers worked a mere 28 hours a week on average. And then, I don't know how long it was ago, I think around 7,000 years ago, farming came along. And by nature of a farm, well, it's much more systematic, and it's much like you're incentivized to grow as many crops as possible and create systems around that. And that meant that just by nature of it, the average working week increased to 35 hours a week, and a lot more people were doing work. Both the women and the men were doing work, whereas previously in hunter-forager times, you'd get a very different demographic doing the work within a given community. And so what I'm saying is that as time has gone on in the grand scheme of humanity, we have just been working more and more and more. And to an extent, it peaked a few hundred years ago when a huge amount of the population worked like 60 hours a week in terrible working conditions. Whereas today, we don't work 60 hours a week and we don't have terrible working conditions, at least in the West. However, we do have almost everyone working at least 35 hours a week. And I just wonder, will AI and that type of thing kind of bring us back down the arc of how many hours we work in a week? Not necessarily today, tomorrow, or in our lifetime, or even our parent or even our children's lifetimes, but maybe in 500, 1,000, 2,000 years later. Will the world 2,000 years from now mean that people do indeed work less than 35 hours a week? Like 30, 28, 25? Like, when will that happen? And how much less will we be able to work?
That's a fascinating question. If we imagine what 2,000 years before today looked like, it looked vastly different to the world we live in today. And so in 2,000 years' time, perhaps society becomes, I think it could either go that society becomes much more equal, and because of the age of abundance, everybody has everything. But I fail to see, because there's going to be new innovations that only some people can get. And I think there still has to be systems where people are filtered, for lack of a better word, and that some people get more things than others, or people who want certain things and perhaps don't want other things. People get different things. We have to have an element of choice, an element of not being exactly identical to each other. And I think people will still remain competitive, and the competitive nature of humans will still exist, such that there will be systems for people to get ahead of other people. And so I think people may just be competing in ways we don't think is possible and we don't think about now, like the way we compete for money, or compete for the best job, or compete for the best university, that people 2,000 years ago would think is completely foreign.
Competition and kind of fighting for yourself and your family has only increased over the thousands of years that humans have been here. And this does seem to be a one-way street. Like, as soon as farming came along, even though farming made you work more and made you work harder, farming just outnumbered. Like, farming communities just outnumbered hunter-forager communities, and that's the reason it succeeded. But I'm wondering, when will this one-way street end? Well, will it ever end? And will AI help us unlock the end of this street so that we can go back down the amount of hours that we work and go, less towards a working society and more towards a leisurely society. Not necessarily a consumer society, but like a society that can enjoy and spend lots of time together and sharing resources and that type of thing. I wonder, is there a point in human history that will help us unlock that future? Anyway, back to the near future. So if people can indeed work less, and I do think there's a possibility that occurs, this will very likely be industry specific. Like we still need people in restaurants working multiple days a week if we want to consume tasty food 7 days a week, which we do. And so will there be certain industries that allow for people to work 4 days a week and certain industries that won't? And which industries do you think this will be?
I think that might be I think that's one way of looking at it, but I think the key issue with that is when an industry can let you work only 4 days a week, they could also just let you work 0 days a week, couldn't you? You could just lose your job because of automation. And I think that's very likely to happen in certain industries. Certainly, it's already happened in things where manufacturing is key because machines have replaced humans a lot. And I think this will inevitably cause a lot of pain and suffering in certain groups because, for example, we might see, AI replace a lot of software engineers. Certainly, there are software engineers doing fairly unremarkable things that could be replaced by AI one day. And so these software engineers, they would either have to upskill, in other words, to be more exceptional software engineers, or they may have to pivot to other industries. And I think that would be extremely, from a social perspective, extremely challenging to navigate, especially as some industries face this transition earlier than others, and some industries may well get completely wiped out. For example, a lot of accounting and finance-related things, I think that some parts can be replaced by AI, and so there will be less demand for jobs, and I think that will be a big issue. In general, though, as you asked, which industries might be more able to shift towards a 4-hour work week than others, I think that a lot of the industries in the background where human interaction is a lesser part would be better suited to this 4-day work week because I think human interaction is still very important in certain areas. But when it isn't important, I think if an AI can do it, and if an AI can do it better, I think there's no reason to keep the human.
As the rate of adoption of automation technologies increases, does this provide an opportunity for perhaps a government to step in to almost enforce or encourage or incentivize the 4-day work week? Because as people are being laid off in certain areas and more people are being hired in other areas, this provides a breakpoint for the government to say, for example, you can now hire employees to work 4 days a week and we'll pay the extra 20% of the salary. And what that essentially means is that a company is spending, yes, they are spending less money per employee, but equally they're making less money per employee. And so that's mostly fine for the company because they can just hire more employees to counteract that fact. And do you think that if a government were to do this, were to intervene at this breakpoint in the world as automation rises, do you think that will result in success? Do you think we can move to most people working 4 days a week?
I think in a situation you described, where a government intervention becomes necessary, I think that will have really profound impacts. And I don't think that, for example, paying 20% of a salary is sustainable because you're essentially wiping out a lot of the tax that the employee would otherwise give to the government. So it's sort of a net neutral. But I guess it makes sense if you can not spend very much money and not gain very much money, but keep somebody employed, because that would then mean that you don't have to pay unemployment benefits and things like that. But I think in a situation like that, if the unemployment rate becomes very high, as we can already see in countries which have high unemployment rates, it poses a massive challenge to the government. And I think we will need completely novel ways of collecting taxes and government function in order to navigate a situation like that.
Now, it's great to talk about working less days a week, but is there actually a benefit to a shorter work week? Like, is the solution instead a better work week? Because humans 10,000 years ago, they may have only worked 28 hours a week, but their work was very demanding, it's very tough, and it's very stressful. And so their goal would actually be to drive that number down to zero just because their work kind of sucked that much. Whereas if you think to the work that humans do today, most people would genuinely want to work a certain amount of hours a week at least because they genuinely find some sort of satisfaction or some enjoyment in their work. It may not be 40 hours worth, but it's definitely going to be a significant amount. And this is kind of like the issue we're seeing in the NHS in the UK, where the staff don't actually care that much about the wages. I think they mostly just care about the working conditions. And I can see that with my parents. They don't necessarily care about getting paid more. They care about the fact that their day-to-day job sucks more than it used to suck 10 years ago. And I mean, from the staff perspective, the easy solution is just to ask for more wages because that makes it easier for you to mentally accept a worse working condition. So I guess the question is, should the government, or should people in general, not necessarily care about working less, but should they try and care about working in a better environment? And how can we achieve this? And how can technology help us achieve this?
I very much think people should, because I think that when you're more willing to work in your job, when you like your job more, as it turns out, you also happen to be more productive, and that's amazing news to employers, right? And I think the difficulty is that it's very difficult to implement changes to improve your working conditions, and it's much easier to get a raise. It's a much more standard thing to do, and I think that's regrettable. But I think COVID, one of the things that it's allowed is that people are more willing to have flexibility in schedules, and employers certainly look at it as something that is much more acceptable. Because previously it used to be that you were frowned upon if you were not in the office 9 to 5. But now, people, especially those with families, have found flexibility. They may still have to go to the office, but they could go to the office for a reduced number of hours, or have the hours made up in a unorthodox manner. So perhaps you like to go in early in the morning, perhaps you stay later in the evenings, but it just means that the additional flexibility really does make people's lives better. And I think that is one example where it improves people's working conditions and it makes them happier employees and often more productive. And I think that can be done in other ways too. Certainly in the NHS, for example, a lot of administrative tasks are being handed to doctors who do not want to do administrative tasks. And I think we need to look at ways to reduce that. And similarly in other professions, I'm sure there are similar examples. I think that is something that generative AI can do, because the things that people don't like about their jobs are usually things that generative AI may do best.
I agree. But taking a step back, isn't it kind of sad how, as society, our solution to a worse job, for example, as we increase up the management chain and we do less of what we actually like, that our solution is just getting paid more to compensate for the fact that we don't like our job as much? I think that's just a little sad, but I don't think there really is a way to redesign society to work otherwise, that now that we've already made this change. I think it probably is a one-way street, definitely in our lifetimes, and hopefully not in the long term.
People just need to have a healthier relationship with money and realize what actually brings them happiness isn't money, but money can bring them things that do bring them happiness, right? For example, if you have hobbies that you really enjoy, that would bring you happiness, and money can facilitate these hobbies. For somebody with expensive hobbies, you may need more money in order to be happy than somebody who has cheaper hobbies. And I think that often isn't taken into account when people evaluate their relationship with money. And I think that, as we all say, money can't bring you happiness, but, well, aside from having a basic standard of living and healthcare and things like that, but it can bring you more opportunities to be happy. And I think people need to evaluate what their personal relationship is, because it is different to different people, and somebody may be happy making much less than somebody else.
I sat next to someone on the plane recently when I came back to the UK, and they made the argument. But so I basically said that people who are happy to be within the systems that currently run the world, for example, the standard university, the standard job, and so on, those people are probably the happiest people on the planet because they are happy to be within the systems, and if they win at the system, they are going to be very happy people. And I was like to her, surely people like you, and she didn't believe in these systems, and she thought it was all garbage. And I asked whether she was actually a happy person than the people who do believe in these systems and live within them happily. And she said that they may be happier for now, but she believes that at some point in everyone's lives, they will reach a point where they suddenly realize that there is almost a higher level to life than living within these systems and getting money. And she believed that the earlier you realize that, the better your life is going to be on a holistic level. So now my question to you, Kuankuan, is, do you believe that everyone at some point in their life will indeed reach this point, this eureka moment, this crisis moment, where they realize that what they've been fighting for in life for the past X years is not what they actually want?
I'm not sure everybody experiences that. I think it's dependent on the environment in which you grow up in. Because I think, for example, the baby boomer generation, certainly in the United States, lived through an era of incredible economic prosperity, such that when you're young, you're taught to work hard, and when you're older, that pays off. And you have a much greater belief in the system than, say, somebody in modern China, where the youth unemployment rate is high, and you may have worked really hard to go to a good university, but now you can't get a good job and you're still suffering. I think your belief in the system is dependent on the system itself and how it performs. And I think that on a grand scale, I think overall the system's going to perform less well for people in the coming years compared to in the past. And as a result, I think increasingly people will get frustrated. And we see this in many examples. Without getting too political, the increased polarization of politics, I believe, is one example of this.
On a positive note, this does highlight that the way you frame something can really influence how happy you are. And so we can all at least try to frame things that we don't like in a way that makes us way happier with what they are.
Thank you for listening. We'll be back next Monday with a new episode.
And check out the description to sign up to our weekly newsletter. You can also reach out to us on X at the WaffleByte. See you there.